What if the Gulf Stream current stopped? Imagine, for a moment, the vast ocean currents that circulate around our planet as immense rivers of water flowing silently yet powerfully beneath the surface. Among these currents, few are as influential as the Gulf Stream. It's a mighty river of warm water that travels from the Gulf of Mexico, hugs the east coast of the United States, and arcs out into the North Atlantic before splitting into smaller branches. For centuries, this oceanic conveyor belt has shaped the climate, habitats, and even the societies of the nations it touches. But what would happen if, suddenly, the Gulf Stream stopped? To answer this question, we must first understand what the Gulf Stream is and why it matters. The Gulf Stream is part of a much larger system known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. Imagine the AMOC as a gargantuan loop of water that transports warm, salty water from the tropics northwards, where it cools, sinks, and then returns southward at deeper levels. This system is a crucial regulator of Earth's climate, redistributing heat and influencing weather patterns across continents and oceans. The Gulf Stream's warm waters act as a central heating system for the eastern seaboard of North America and, more significantly, for northwestern Europe. This is why cities like London and Paris enjoy milder winters than other locations at similar latitudes, like Newfoundland or Moscow. But the Gulf Stream does more than just keep things warm. It powers marine ecosystems, fuels fisheries, shapes hurricanes, and underpins the delicate balance between land, sea, and sky in the North Atlantic. Now, let's consider the impossible, or at least the improbable. The Gulf Stream grinding to a halt. What could bring about such a dramatic event? In reality, scientists are concerned not so much that the Gulf Stream itself would suddenly stop, but that the broader conveyor belt of the AMOC could weaken or even collapse. The reason? Climate change. As the planet warms, ice sheets in Greenland and the Arctic are melting faster and faster, pouring vast quantities of fresh water into the North Atlantic. Fresh water is less dense than salty seawater, and this disruption reduces the propensity for water to cool, sink, and continue the cycle that drives the AMOC. The concern is not merely hypothetical. Data collected in recent years suggests the AMOC is already slowing, possibly by as much as 15% since the mid-20th century. Some computer models predict a partial or even complete collapse by the end of the century if greenhouse gas emissions continue unabated. But what would happen, tangibly and dramatically, if the Gulf Stream, this essential artery of the ocean, stopped altogether? The first and most profound impact would be on climate. Without the Gulf Stream transporting warmth northward, Western Europe in particular would experience a dramatic shift in climate. Winters would become far harsher, rivaling those found in parts of eastern Canada or Siberia. Summers would likely be cooler and shorter. The temperate, moist conditions that have supported agriculture, forests, and urban life for generations might rapidly give way to something colder and less forgiving. Consider London, a city whose average January temperature hovers around 3.5 degrees Celsius. Without the moderating effect of the Gulf Stream, that average could plummet below freezing and remain there for months, transforming the landscape from green and rain-soaked to snow-covered and icy. The Thames might freeze as it famously did during Europe's Little Ice Age, when the AMOC slowed and Europe shivered, crops failed, and famine struck. This regional cooling would not be confined to the British Isles. All across Western Europe, from Portugal to Norway, winters would become longer and more severe. The growing season would shrink, jeopardizing crops such as wheat, maize, and grapes that have shaped the continent's cuisine and economy for centuries. Forests would shift, with cold-tolerant species replacing oaks, beeches, and pines. Wildlife would be forced to migrate or risk extinction. People, too, might abandon harsher climes, leading to migration both within Europe and perhaps even beyond. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the eastern United States and Canada would also see significant changes, not so much in temperature, but in weather. The Gulf Stream is a key ingredient in hurricane formation, fueling these deadly storms with warm ocean water. If the Gulf Stream stopped, the coastal waters of the North Atlantic would cool, potentially reducing the frequency of hurricanes. But when they did form, their paths might shift in unpredictable ways. But the consequences of a halted Gulf Stream extend far beyond mere temperature. Ocean currents do not only shuffle heat from place to place, they also drive enormous flows of nutrients, oxygen, and carbon. The collapse of the AMOC would disrupt the distribution of marine nutrients, undermining North Atlantic fisheries that support millions of people, from American lobster boats to Norwegian cod trawlers. Plankton blooms, the base of the marine food chain, could diminish or change location, triggering cascading effects through ecosystems and economies alike. Weather patterns would grow more chaotic and extreme. The Gulf Stream helps steer the jet stream, a river of air high above the Earth's surface, which drives storm tracks across North America Sea and Europe. As the AMOC falters, the jet stream could wobble or stall, bringing prolonged periods of drought, torrential rain, or even unseasonable warmth or cold. In North America, the northeastern states might experience wetter winters and drier summers. In Europe, more frequent winter storms could batter coastlines, while summers might bring unusual heat waves or cold snaps. Perhaps even more insidiously, the global system for moving heat and moisture between oceans and atmosphere might become unbalanced, with knock-on effects as far away as the Sahel in Africa or the Amazon rainforest. Some scientists warn that a collapse of the AMOC could shift global rainfall patterns, making the Amazon drier and the Western Sahel wetter, upending communities, economies, and ecosystems nowhere near the North Atlantic. Of course, the stopping of the Gulf Stream would not only affect humans, but the entire web of life. Coral reefs in the Caribbean and Western Atlantic depend on the mixing of warm and cool water. Sensitive species could die off as their habitats change beyond recognition. In the North Atlantic, whales, dolphins, and migratory fish might desert their ancestral feeding grounds, following shifting bands of plankton and krill to new, unfamiliar, and potentially dangerous waters. Seabirds, too, might vanish from once thriving nesting sites as the food web collapses beneath them. Sea level rise is another, less obvious, but profoundly important consequence. The Gulf Stream, as it rushes northward, actually pulls water away from the U.S. East Coast, lowering the local sea level by as much as half a meter compared to the open Atlantic. If the Gulf Stream were to stop, this pile of water would relax, raising sea levels suddenly along the eastern United States by up to a foot or more. For cities like Miami, New York, and Boston, all already vulnerable to flooding from rising seas and storm surges, this could spell disaster. And let us not overlook geopolitics and human society. Europe relies heavily on stable, predictable climates for energy, transportation, and agriculture. Colder winters would mean higher heating costs, increased pressure on electricity grids, and heightened demand for fossil fuels just when the world is trying to transition to cleaner energy. Food prices could soar as crops fail, potentially fueling social unrest. Migration would intensify as people sought better lives in less affected regions, creating tension between nations over scarce resources and safe havens. All of this may sound alarmist, even apocalyptic, but the reality is that the Gulf Stream has stopped, or at least has faltered, before. At the end of the last ice age, a massive pulse of fresh water from the melting Laurentide ice sheet flooded into the North Atlantic, weakening the AMOC and plunging the Northern Hemisphere into a millennium-long deep freeze known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures in parts of Europe dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Glaciers advanced, and human civilization was almost certainly shaped by these cataclysmic changes. The difference today is our sheer numbers and the interconnectedness of our societies. 7 billion people now depend on stable weather, predictable agriculture, and friendly oceans. A sudden shock to the climate system would reverberate across every sector of our existence, from the food we eat to the homes we live in, the jobs we have, and the hopes we hold. Yet it is important to note that while the abrupt stop of the Gulf Stream is considered unlikely, the possibility of a partial slowdown is both plausible and already underway. Even a slow shift, by scientific standards, can have profound consequences for human and natural systems. The prospect of the Gulf Stream and the wider AMOC teaches us much about the incredible complexity and sensitivity of Earth's systems. It reminds us that we live not upon a stable planet, but upon a world in constant motion, a world we are now changing at unprecedented speed. So, what can be done? Scientists are racing to better understand the AMOK, deploying satellite sensors, deep water buoys, and computer models to track its behavior and make more accurate predictions about its future. Yet there is little doubt that reducing greenhouse gas emissions, slowing global warming, and curbing ice melt are crucial steps if we wish to avoid the worst-case scenarios. There is also a lesson in humility here. The vast forces of nature, which seem so eternal and immovable, can in fact be fragile. What took millions of years to evolve, the Gulf Stream, and its role in shaping life and society, could be disrupted in the space of a human lifetime. Our actions, taken collectively, are nudging the delicate levers of climate and oceanic circulation, with consequences both immediate and far-reaching. Imagine walking along the windswept cliffs of Western Ireland, the spray of the Atlantic on your face, the land green even in winter, sheep grazing beneath scattered clouds. Now, in a world without the Gulf Stream, that same coast could be rimed with frost, the grass yellowed by cold, and life harsher for nature and for people alike. The stakes are enormous. As we look towards the future, the story of the Gulf Stream is a cautionary tale, a reminder of nature's power, its complexity, and its vulnerability. It is a call to action, to stewardship, and perhaps to the wisdom of living more gently upon a world whose hidden currents sustain us all. The stopping of the Gulf Stream would not mark the end of civilization. Humans, after all, are resilient, adaptive, and ingenious. But it would be a defining event, reshaping economies, ecologies, and lives on a grand scale. It is not a question of if, but of how much we are willing to risk, how mindful we are of the connections that bind sea to sky, ocean to city, wave to weather, and past to future. In that knowledge, perhaps we may find the resolve not only to understand the Gulf Stream, but to protect it and the world it helps to sustain. Thank you for watching the video. What do you think about today's topic? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and share the video to support the channel. Thanks again, and see you in the next video.